The dust was the first thing and the last thing. It was the color of rust and sin, and it coated every surface of the small cabin Clara's family had built with green, unseasoned wood. It got in the water barrel, in the flour sack, and in the lines of her father's face. Out here, near the gritty little town that squatted by the creek, the drought was not just weather, it was judgment. Clara Wells wiped her chapped hands on her apron, her eyes on the cracked earth that should have been their first cornfield. They had come from Missouri with enough hope to fill the wagon, but the New Mexico territory had leached it dry. The sky was a pale, hot iron, promising nothing. Inside the cabin, her father, Samuel, sat in the chair he seldom left. The stroke had taken the strength from his left side and the light from his eyes. He had been a proud man, a man who believed in the sweat of his own brow. Now, he just stared at the wall, his silence a heavier burden on Clara than the water buckets she hauled from the nearly dry creek half a mile away. Her younger brother, Thomas, only 14, did what he could, but he was thin-boned and quiet, better with books than an axe. Her mother, Mary, seemed to shrink with every passing day, her prayers becoming whispers of complaint against the land they had chosen. The roof, patched with sod and hope, leaked. It was the cruelest joke. For weeks they prayed for rain, and when a brief violent thunderstorm finally broke the heat 2 nights past, the rain found its way in, soaking the pallet where Thomas slept and turning the dirt floor to mud near the hearth. Clara shouldered it all. She mended the roof, measured the cornmeal, bargained in town for credit they did not have, and tended to her father's needs, bathing him and forcing broth between his lips. She was 19, but she felt as worn as the boot leather her father had used to patch the wagon. It was on a supply trip, walking the 2 miles into town because their only mule was lame, that she first saw the man named Eli. He was working at the livery, mucking out stalls. The stable master, a hard man named Shaw, watched him like a hawk. Clara had seen drifters before, men passing through, but this one was different. He was tall and built broad, but he moved with a stillness, a kind of heavy quiet that drew the eye. His hat was pulled low, and he did not look up, not even when Shaw tossed a small coin at his feet. He was, Clara saw, working for pennies, for food, for a place to sleep in the hayloft. He wore the trail on him. His clothes were stiff with dirt and sweat, and his beard was rough. He was gruff and silent, and the town already knew it. Clara went into Henderson's mercantile, the list in her hand feeling heavier than lead. She waited while Mrs. Davies bought lace and sugar, her purse snapping shut with a sound of finality. When it was Clara's turn, Mr. Henderson did not smile. He looked at her list: flour, salt, kerosene, lard. "Credit, Miss Wells?" he asked, loud enough for the others to hear. Clara felt the heat rise in her neck. "If you please, Mr. Henderson, my father. He will settle it when the crop comes in." Henderson gave a short, unkind laugh. "Crop? What crop? That patch of dust you're scratching at? Your father's done, girl. The stroke took him, and this drought took the rest. The bank holds the note on that land." Clara flinched, her hands tightening on the worn counter. "We will pay. We just need time." "Time is money," Henderson said, pushing her list back toward her. "And you have neither. I am not running a charity for failed Missouri farmers." The insult landed like a slap. It was one thing to be poor. It was another to have it thrown in her face, to have her father's tragedy used as a shopkeeper's punchline. The other women in the store looked away, studying bolts of calico. "Please, Mr. Henderson, just the flour. My brother—" I said no. A shadow fell across the counter. Clara had not heard him enter. The man from the livery stood beside her. Eli did not look at Clara. He looked at the shopkeeper. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, like stones grinding together. "Give the girl the flour." Henderson's face hardened. This ain't your affair, drifter. Move on. Eli did not move. He simply waited. He was not armed. Not that Clara could see, but something in his stance, a terrible, rooted stillness, made the air in the store go cold. He seemed to draw all the light toward him and swallow it. I heard you, Henderson said, his voice thinning. Get out of my store. The flower, Eli said again. It was not a request. Henderson looked at the man's eyes, hidden mostly by the hat, and what he saw there made him break. The shopkeeper was a man of commerce, of weights and measures. This man was something else entirely, something from the wild places, something that did not belong on a ledger. With a shaky hand, Henderson grabbed a sack of flour and shoved it onto the counter. Take it and get out, both of you. Eli turned and walked out. He did not wait for her. He did not look back. Clara, trembling, grabbed the flour. I will pay you back, Mr. Henderson, I swear it. Just go, he whispered, already angry at his own fear. She hurried out, her heart pounding. The street was empty save for the man, Eli, already halfway to the livery. Sir, she called out, running to catch up. He stopped but did not turn. Sir, I wanted to thank you. He shrugged, his back still to her. He was wrong to speak so. He was? Clara whispered. But you drew trouble on yourself for me. I saw Mr. Henderson's face, and the others. They'll talk. He finally turned, just slightly. She could see his face in the harsh sunlight. It was a hard face, weathered and scarred at the jawline. But his eyes were not what she expected. They were gray and tired, haunted by things she could not guess. Let them talk, he said. We do not have much, Clara said, rushing the words. My family. But we have a stew tonight, and coffee. Please, let me offer you a meal. As thanks. Eli looked at her as if she were speaking a language he did not understand. Kindness was a foreign currency here, and he was broke. No need, he said, turning to go. Please, Clara insisted, stepping in his path. She was moved by something she could not name, a kinship, perhaps. She knew what it was to be judged. It would mean something to me, to pay the kindness back proper. He studied her face, his gaze sharp and assessing. He was looking for the trick. He found none. He saw only the dust on her cheeks and the earnest, desperate sincerity in her eyes. Finally, he gave one short, curt nod. Where? The cabin with the broken fence, half a mile down the creek road. Sundown. He nodded again and was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the livery. When Eli arrived at dusk, his presence filled the small cabin with a tension that choked the air. He had washed his face and hands, but he still smelled of hay and the trail. He held his hat in his hands, his gaze fixed on the floorboards. Samuel, from his chair, made a low, guttural sound. His good hand gripped the arm of the chair, his knuckles white. Papa, Clara said softly, this is the man who helped me in town. Samuel's eyes were full of suspicion and anger. He saw a stranger, a rough man, and he saw his daughter, who had invited him in without permission. Mary fidgeted by the hearth, wringing her hands in her apron. Thomas watched the stranger from the corner, wide-eyed. Sit, Clara said, gesturing to the small bench at their rough-hewn table. Eli sat. The bench creaked under his weight. The silence in the cabin was broken only by the bubbling of the thin rabbit stew and Samuel's labored breathing. Clara moved with practiced efficiency, her shame at their poverty warring with her duty as a host. She ladled the stew into a bowl, the only one that was not cracked, and set it before him with a spoon and a piece of cornbread. He stared at it for a long moment before picking up the spoon. He ate quickly, without noise, like a man who was used to eating alone and in a hurry. Clara poured coffee, the precious grounds saved for guests, though they had not had a guest in months. The pot was heavy. As she leaned over to fill his tin cup, her hand trembled from the weight and the nerves. His hands were on the table, flanking the cup. They were rough, scarred, the knuckles split and healed over, the nails rimmed with dirt that no amount of washing could scrub away. They were the hands of a man who had held reins, and tools, and perhaps, she thought, weapons. As she poured, her hand slipped. The hot liquid threatened to spill. To steady the pot, she put her left hand down, her fingers brushing the back of his right hand where it rested on the table. It was nothing, a feather-light touch, born of necessity. Eli went rigid. He didn't pull away, but every muscle in his body seemed to lock. He stopped chewing. His gaze snapped up from the plate to meet hers. Clara froze. His skin was calloused, but beneath the roughness, it was warm. It was human. She felt a jolt, sharp and sudden, like static in a dry winter. She did not pull back immediately. She held the contact for a second. Her eyes locked with his. She was not afraid. She was offering comfort. She was saying, "You are welcome here. I see you." Then she finished pouring and straightened up, moving to serve her father. But the moment lingered. It hung in the air between them, more substantial than the steam from the coffee. For Eli, the touch was a brand. It had been years since anyone had touched him with kindness, a touch that was not a shove, or a blow, or a transaction. This settler girl, with eyes too old for her face, had touched him as if he were a man and not a ghost. He felt the ghost of her fingers on his skin long after she had moved away, a small point of heat that he could not understand and did not trust. He finished his meal in silence, nodded his thanks to Clara, ignoring her parents, and left as quietly as he had come. The talk started the next day. Clara heard it when she went to the creek for water. Mrs. Davies and another woman, Mrs. Shaw, were there. They stopped talking when Clara approached, but not before Clara heard the words. Henderson's store, brazen as you please, stood up to Mr. Henderson for her. And now she's feeding him, at her cabin, with her sick father right there. Shameless. He's a killer, my husband says. Rode with a bad bunch down in Texas. Shaw only hired him because he's cheap and no one else will. The settler girl and the killer cowboy. What a pair. Clara ignored them, filled her buckets, and walked back, her spine straight, the wooden yoke digging into her shoulders. The shame burned, but the memory of Eli's defense and the shocking stillness of his hand under hers burned hotter. 2 days later, Eli appeared at their homestead. He did not come to the door. Clara was outside, trying to coax their lame mule into the small, rickety barn. When she saw him, he was carrying tools he must have borrowed from the livery. He walked past her, his gaze set on the sagging roof of the barn. "Sir," Clara called out. He grunted in acknowledgement, but kept walking. He set his tools down, pulled a ladder from the side of the cabin, and propped it against the barn. "What are you doing?" Clara asked. Following him. "Roof's rotted," he said. He pulled a few loose shingles, testing the wood. "Next rain, it'll come down on your mule." "We cannot pay you," Clara said immediately, mortified. Eli looked down at her from the ladder. His face was impassive. "Didn't ask for pay." "But we cannot. It's charity. My father will not accept." "Your father ain't on the roof," Eli said. He pulled a hammer from his belt and began to work, the sound of his blows sharp and final in the dry air. Clara watched him for nearly an hour. He worked with a grim efficiency, tearing away the rotten sod and planks, his shoulders straining against his worn shirt. He was strong, and he was thorough. Her father had seen him from the window. Clara could feel Samuel's silent, impotent rage from the cabin. She went inside. Her mother was weeping quietly at the table. "Clara, what have you done? You've brought that man here. The whole town is talking. They say he's a murderer, and now he's on our roof. Samuel he's beside himself. He is fixing the roof. Mama, the roof you cried about 2 nights ago. It's not right. It's not decent. It is kind, Clara said, her voice hard. And I will not turn kindness away. We cannot afford to. She filled a dipper with water and took it back out. Eli was sweating, the sun beating down on him. She waited by the ladder. After several minutes, he came down. He took the dipper, drank the water in 3 long swallows, and handed it back, his knuckles brushing hers. This time, neither of them flinched. He worked all afternoon. He used new lumber he must have scrounged from Shaw's scrap pile. He did not speak. He just worked. As the sun began to dip, painting the dusty sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. Clara came out of the cabin. He was gathering his tools. The roof had a solid, new patch. It was rough, but it was strong. "It's done," he said, not looking at her. "You must stay for supper." She said it was not a question. He shook his head. "Gotta get back." He was already trying to leave, to escape the debt of another meal, another moment of connection. "No," Clara said, stepping in front of him. Eli stopped. He was so much taller than her. He loomed over her, a man wrapped in shadow and rumor. "You worked all day," she said, her voice quiet but shaking with a strange intensity. "You did not ask for pay. You defended me. You fixed our home. I owed you for the meal," he growled. "You paid for that meal in the mercantile," she countered, her chin lifting. This is something else. You cannot work all day in this heat and eat nothing. I will not allow it." Eli's jaw tightened. He wanted to push past her. He wanted to be back in the hayloft, where it was dark and no one spoke to him, where no one touched him or offered him things he had not earned. He did not know how to accept this. He did not believe he was worthy of it. Clara saw the war in his eyes, the pride, the shame, and the deep, aching loneliness. She saw a man as trapped by his past as her father was by his chair. She reached out, slowly, and put her hand on his forearm. His muscles were rigid as wood. "Please," she whispered, "let me serve you." It was the word serve that broke him. It was not help. It was not pay. It was serve. It was a word of respect. It offered him a dignity that the world had long since clawed away. It was a request, not a demand, and it put the power in his hands. Eli looked at her small, chapped hand on his arm. He looked at her tired, earnest face. The sun was gone, and the air was cooling, but he could still feel the phantom heat of her touch from the day before. He could not remember the last time he had made a choice that was not about running or fighting. He let out a breath he felt he had been holding since Texas. Slowly, his shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He gave one small nod. Clara took her hand back, though the warmth of him lingered on her skin. "Come inside," she said softly. "I've kept the stew warm." He followed her into the small, dim cabin, leaving the dust and the rumors outside. He took his place by the fire, a man who had been invited in. And for one night, he was not a killer. He was just a man. The silence that fell between Clara and Eli was a different kind than the one the territory kept. Theirs was a silence of work, of shared tasks that left no breath for words. Eli began to stay. He never asked. He would simply appear at sunup, his borrowed tools in hand, and begin. He and Clara moved in a quiet rhythm, a language of past hammers and shared burdens. Together, they restrung the fence line that sagged with neglect. Clara's hands were soft, but she learned to pull the wire taut while he set the posts, his muscles straining in the cold air. She would hold the post steady, her shoulder braced against the wood, while he tamped the earth around its base with heavy, final thuds. He showed her how to brace it, how to respect the grain of the wood. He spoke little, but his hands were good teachers. The drought had broken, but winter was stalking them, trading the dry heat for a damp, penetrating cold. Sleet came, sharp as needles, driven by a wind that never seemed to stop. They worked through it. They hauled water together, the two of them carrying the heavy yoke between them, their steps falling into unison on the muddy path to the creek. They chopped firewood, the ring of his axe a steady heartbeat against the whine of the wind. Clara would stack the split logs, her fingers growing numb, until Eli would gruffly take the wood from her, his own hands bare and seemingly immune to the cold. He ate supper with them every night now. Samuel still watched him, his good eye filled with resentment, but he said nothing. The new patch on the roof held, and the barn was secure. A man who worked for his keep was harder to hate, even for a man broken by pride. Mary, however, was terrified. She saw the way Clara looked at the drifter. She saw the way Clara's hands would pause when she handed him a cup, the way her gaze would soften. One evening, while mending harnesses by the fire, Eli watched Clara tend to her father. She was gentle, spooning broth into his mouth, wiping his chin, her movements full of a patient, weary love. A shadow crossed Eli's face, a darkness so profound it seemed to pull the firelight into it. Clara, finished with her task, sat on the stool opposite him, picking up her own mending. "You look as if you've seen a ghost," she said softly. Eli kept his eyes on the leather strap in his hands, his knife skillfully skiving the edge. "I have—" The cabin was quiet. Her parents were asleep, or pretending to be. "Was it someone you cared for?" Clara ventured, her needle stopping. He worked the leather. The knife blade flashed. "I had a family once." The words were ripped from him, low and ragged. "A wife, a boy." Clara's breath caught. She had known grief. She knew the shape of it. This was it. What were their names? He flinched, as if the question were a physical blow. "Sarah, and the boy. We just called him Little Eli. They're gone." It was not a question. "Gone," he affirmed, the word hollow. "What happened?" she whispered, leaning forward. "Was it the sickness, the cholera?" Eli's hand stopped. The knife rested on the wood block. He stared into the fire, but he was seeing something else, a different fire. "It was a raid," he said, his voice flat. "Dead. Comancheros." He said nothing more. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of a locked door, of a deep, dark room. He would not let her enter. "Eli," she started, reaching a hand toward him. "It's done." He cut her off, his voice turning to gravel. He picked up the knife, his movement sudden and violent, and drove the point into the wood block. He stood, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. "I'll sleep in the barn. The wind's picking up." He left without looking back, plunging into the cold dark, leaving Clara by the fire, her heart aching with the half-shared sorrow. He was a man with a lock on his soul, and she did not have the key. The town, however, had a key of its own: judgment. On Sunday, Reverend Gideon made the trip out to the Wells homestead. He was a tall, thin man with a gaunt face and eyes that burned with righteousness. He did not come for social comfort. He came for war. He sat at their table, refusing Mary's offer of coffee. He looked at Samuel, a man brought low, and then at Clara. "Mr. Wells," the preacher began, his voice a sonorous hum. "Your neighbors are concerned. Your daughter, she keeps company with a man of profound and violent reputation." Clara stood by the hearth, her hands clenched. "He is a hired hand, Reverend," Clara said, her voice shaking. "He fixed our barn." "He is a killer, Miss Wells," Gideon snapped, his eyes flashing to her. "He rode with border ruffians. He is a man who has lived by the gun, and he is not fit for decency. He is a vessel of wrath, and you invite him to your table." "He has been kind to us," Clara insisted. "The devil is often kind when he seeks entry," the preacher said. He turned back to Samuel. You are the head of this house. You must cast him out. You are bringing shame upon your name and tempting the judgment of the Lord. The town will not abide it. They will not trade with you. They will not associate with you. You will be as lepers." Samuel's good hand gripped the chair. A low, angry sound came from his throat. He looked at Clara, his face a mask of fury and shame. He could not speak, but his eyes screamed at her. "You have done this!" Mary was openly weeping. "Please, Reverend, she's a good girl. She doesn't see the danger." "Then you must make her see," Gideon said, standing. He placed his hat on his head. "Choose this day whom you will serve, God, or the darkness this man brings." He left. The cabin was filled with the sound of Mary's sobs and Samuel's pained, ragged breathing. The preacher's threat was not idle. The next day, Clara and Thomas took their wagon to town with 24 eggs and a sack of late-harvest potatoes. They set up their small stand by the mercantile. No one came. Mrs. Davies, who always bought their eggs, saw them, pursed her lips, and crossed the street. Mr. Shaw, the livery owner, spat a stream of tobacco juice near the wagon wheel and turned his back. Children who normally played with Thomas were called inside by their mothers. Clara and Thomas sat there for 3 hours, a small island of shame in the middle of the town. The silence was louder than any insult. They were shunned. Thomas, his face pale, stared at the dust. "It's because of him, isn't it?" "It's because of ignorance," Clara said, her voice tight. "They called him a killer," Thomas whispered. "He's not," Clara said, with more certainty than she felt. That afternoon, Thomas went to the creek alone. He was gone for over an hour. He came back carrying an empty bucket, his face a ruin, his lip was split and bleeding, and his left eye was already swelling shut. "Thomas!" Clara screamed, dropping the feed sack. She ran to him, grabbing his face. "Who did this?" Thomas tried to pull away, humiliation and pain warring in his eyes. "It was nothing, just some town boys." "What did they say?" Clara demanded, her voice rising. They called Mr. Eli a murderer," Thomas stammered, the tears finally coming. "And they said you were his—" He choked on the word, unable to repeat the crude insult. "I hit him. I hit James Shaw." Clara's heart seized. She cleaned his face, her hands trembling with a cold fury. Eli found them by the pump. He had been working on the mule's hoof. He took one look at Thomas's face, then at Clara's. His own expression turned to stone. "What happened?" he asked. "He got in a fight," Clara said, her voice like ice. "Defending you, defending me." Eli looked at the boy. He saw the split lip, the swelling eye. He saw the shame of the town, the preacher's words, the isolation. He saw the mark he had left on this family, like a boot print on a clean floor. He was poison. Everything he touched, he spoiled. He looked at Clara. Her eyes were defiant, accusing him, accusing the world. He had seen that look once before, on Sarah's face, right before she'd told him not to ride with those men. He turned, without a word, and walked away. "Eli!" Clara called after him. He did not stop. He walked past the barn, past the fence line he had mended, and just kept walking, heading toward the livery in town. Clara knew. He was leaving. He was running again. He thought he had caused too much trouble. He thought he was sparing them. But as Clara watched him go, his back straight and unforgiving, she felt a different kind of trouble, a hollow ache that felt like breaking. Eli walked into the livery. Shaw was there, rubbing ointment on his son's bruised knuckles. When Shaw saw Eli, he reached for the shotgun he kept by the door. "Get out!" Shaw snarled. "You're done here, causing trouble with my boy, bringing your filth onto that family." "I'm leaving," Eli said. He threw his tools on the floor. "I've got $2 wages coming." Shaw stared at him, surprised. He tossed $2 on the hay-strewn floor. "And cartridges. You owe me for the lumber." "Keep the cartridges," Eli said. He picked up the coins. He saddled his horse, a rangy roan that had seen better days, and rode out of the livery. Not north, not south, but west, toward the empty, howling plains. He rode hard. He rode to outrun the image of the boy's face. He rode to outrun the feeling of Clara's hand on his arm. The wind picked up, a high, thin scream, and the sky began to turn a sickly, bruised yellow. A duster was coming. The wind clawed at him, and it brought the ghosts. He was not in New Mexico. He was on the border. Years ago, the air was thick with smoke, but it was not dust. It was the smoke of burning homesteads. He'd been riding with a rough outfit, men who claimed to be hunting rustlers, but who were rustlers themselves. And worse, he'd joined them for the pay, for the feeling of belonging to something, anything, after the war had spit him out. He had built a small cabin for Sarah. He had cleared 10 acres. Little Eli, only 3, had a small wooden horse Eli had carved. He had left them. He had left them to ride with those men. Just for a week, he'd told Sarah, just to make some money for seed. She had begged him not to. She had said those men had dead eyes. He had come back to ashes. The raid had come from the south. Comancheros, they said, but he knew. He knew the kind of men who rode the border. It didn't matter who held the torch. He had not been there. He had been riding for pay while his world burned. He found the wooden horse in the dirt, half charred. He had carried it ever since, a lump of coal in his saddlebag, a constant reminder of his failure. He was a man who had not been there. He was a man who ran. He was a man who brought ruin. He spurred his horse, riding into the teeth of the gathering storm, seeking an oblivion the wind was happy to provide. Back at the cabin, Clara was frantic. The sky was turning a terrifying shade of ochre. The wind was a physical blow, rattling the windows. "He's out there," she yelled to her mother over the roar. "He is not your concern." "Clara," Mary shouted back, her face pale with fear. "He left. He chose to. You will not go after him." "He left because of us. Because of me." Clara was already pulling her heaviest shawl around her. Her father was hammering his good hand on the arm of his chair. A useless, angry thunder. "It is madness," Mary cried. "You will be killed. It is a duster." "He will die out there." "Let him. He is not our blood." Clara looked at her mother, her eyes blazing. "He is mine." She did not know what the words meant, but she knew they were true. She ran from the cabin, ignoring her mother's scream. The lame mule was in the barn, huddling against the far wall. It was all she had. She threw a bridle on it, not even bothering with a saddle, and hauled herself onto its back. She kicked the mule into the wind, riding toward the west, into the thickening cloud of grit. "Eli!" she screamed, the name torn from her throat and swallowed by the storm. The world vanished. It was not darkness. It was a smothering, suffocating brown. The sun was gone. The land was gone. There was only the howl of the wind and the sting of sand that felt like fire on her skin. She pulled the shawl over her mouth and nose, but she could not breathe. The grit was in her throat, in her eyes. The mule, blind and terrified, stumbled, throwing her hard onto the rocky ground. The animal scrambled to its feet and disappeared into the brown hell, a shadow swallowed by a greater shadow. "Eli!" she cried again, but it was only a croak. She was lost. She had no idea which way the cabin was, which way was west. The world was gone. She crawled, trying to find shelter, and huddled behind a small outcrop of rock. The wind tried to peel her away from it. She was being buried alive, the grit piling up against her back, stinging her hands as she covered her face. This was it. This was how she died, alone, in the dirt, calling for a man who did not want to be found. She curled into a ball, the cold seeping into her bones, and let the storm take her. Eli had found shelter, A shallow cave in a rocky embankment he had noted weeks before. He had his horse settled in the back, shielded from the wind. He was safe. He was alone. But as the storm reached its peak, he could not rest. He saw her face. He saw her at the creek. He saw her hand on his arm. "Let me serve you." He saw her cleaning her brother's wounds, her face tight with fury. "She is mine." The thought came to him as clear as her voice. She was not his, but he was, he realized, hers. He cursed, a raw, ragged sound. He had left her to that, to the town, to the shame. He was a coward. And then a new thought, cold and sharp as the sleet. She's a fool. She's a fool enough to come after me. The terror that seized him was worse than the memory of the fire. He pulled his hat low, tied his kerchief over his face, and remounted his horse. He rode back into the storm, back toward the Wells homestead. It was impossible. He was riding blind. He was trusting an instinct he thought was long dead. He found her by a miracle, a flash of blue in the brown maelstrom. It was the edge of her skirt, not yet buried. She was half unconscious, slumped against the rock. "Clara!" he roared. He fell from his horse, pulling her up from the drift. She was limp, cold. Her face was caked in mud and dust. He shook her, panic clawing at his throat. "Clara!" She moaned, a small animal sound. She was alive. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. He threw her onto his horse and mounted behind her, pulling her back against his chest, shielding her with his own body. He turned the horse, letting the animal find its way back to the cave, the wind now at their backs. He carried her inside, into the relative quiet of the shelter. The storm howled at the mouth of the cave, but inside, it was still. It was dark. He had no wood for a fire. She was shivering, her body going into shock from the cold. He sat with his back against the rock wall, pulling her into his lap, cradling her against his chest. He unwrapped his bedroll and draped it over both of them, then added his heavy canvas coat. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight, trying to force his own warmth into her. He held her like that all night. He held her as she shivered, as she murmured in a half-delirium, as her body slowly stopped shaking and relaxed against him in sleep. He did not sleep. He stared at the mouth of the cave, listening to the death song of the wind. He held the only living, good thing he had touched in a decade. He was terrified. He was terrified he would break her. He was terrified he had already killed her. Her breath, soft against his neck, was a small, fragile miracle. He had failed Sarah. He would not, he could not, fail this. The storm died before dawn. An eerie, muffled silence fell over the world, a world buried in a brown shroud. Clara woke slowly. She was warm, inexplicably, impossibly warm. She was pressed against something solid and breathing. She opened her eyes. The first light, weak and brown, filtered into the cave. She saw the rough wool of a man's shirt. She smelled horse and sweat and dust. She was wrapped in Eli's arms. He was awake. He was staring at the cave entrance, his face a haggard mask of exhaustion. He looked, she thought, destroyed. His jaw was covered in stubble, his eyes bloodshot and haunted. He was a man who had been to war and back during the night. He felt her stir, and his whole body went rigid. He loosened his grip instantly, starting to pull away, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. Clara sat up, pulling the bedroll with her. Her body ached. Her throat felt like it was full of sand. She looked at him, at the raw vulnerability in his eyes. He looked like a man expecting to be struck, or screamed at. She reached out and touched his arm. His muscles were bunched, hard as rock. "You didn't hurt me," she whispered, her voice a rasp. She saw the relief and confusion flood his face. "You saved me." Eli turned his head away, his throat working. He could not look at her. He could not accept her grace. It was too heavy. I'm not made for this," he finally choked out, the words tasting like ash. "I'm not made for peace, for people." He gestured to the dust-choked world outside, a mirror of his own soul. "I bring ruin, I bring storms." Clara looked at his profile, at the hard line of his jaw, the profound pain etched around his eyes. She saw the man who had lost everything, the man who believed he was a curse. She saw the man who had ridden back into hell for her. She moved closer, onto her knees, until she was directly in front of him in the dim light. "Then I'll be your peace," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it filled the small cave. It was not a plea, it was a vow. Eli stopped breathing. He slowly, so slowly, turned his head. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the dust in her hair, the cuts on her cheek, and the absolute terrifying certainty in her eyes. He saw a peace he did not deserve, a peace that was offering itself to him, and he did not know what to do, other than to just stay. The ride back from the cave was silent. Eli walked, leading the horse that carried Clara. The world was scoured, new and hostile. When they reached the homestead, Mary Wells ran out, her face a mask of terror and relief. She grabbed Clara, pulling her from the horse and into her arms, sobbing. Samuel, from the cabin doorway, watched Eli. His face was granite. He said nothing as Eli, without a word, turned and walked back toward town. He did not ask for thanks, and none was offered. But the story of that night twisted as it traveled. Clara Wells had not been lost in the duster. She had run away with the killer, spent the night with him, alone, in the wilderness. The town, which had been content to shun them, now had a focal point for its righteousness. The women whispered behind their hands at the mercantile, and the men at the saloon spoke of it in low, crude terms. Clara had not just associated with the drifter. She had lain with him. She was spoiled. The next time Clara and Thomas went to town, their small offering of mended harnesses and carved wooden spoons sat untouched. Mr. Henderson came out of his store. "Miss Wells," he said, not unkindly, but with a firm finality. "Take your things. You cannot sell here. It is not proper. It's bad for business. People are upset." "Upset?" Clara's voice was thin, cold. "My brother and I were nearly frozen in the duster. Mr. Eli saved me." Henderson shook his head, looking at his boots. "That is not the story being told, Clara, and it is the story being told that matters. I am sorry." They walked home, the unsold goods a heavy weight in their wagon. That night, her father spoke. It had been weeks since he had formed more than 2 or 3 words. The rage gave him a terrible, temporary strength. He sat by the fire, his good hands shaking, pointing at Clara. "You," he rasped, his voice a dry crackle. "You did this. Shame. You brought shame." "Papa, no," Clara whispered, her heart breaking. "I did nothing." "You brought him here," Samuel accused, his voice rising to a terrible, strangled shout. "The preacher warned. You whore, you worthless." He could not finish. The effort cost him, and he slumped back, his face purple, his breath coming in wheezing gasps. "Papa!" Clara cried, rushing to him. He shoved her away with his good arm, his eyes filled with a hatred that was born of his own helplessness. He was a man who could not protect his family, who could not work his land, and his daughter had become the symbol of all his failure. He blamed her for the drought, for the shunned goods, for the whispers. He blamed her because she was standing, and he was sitting. Clara fled to the barn, her father's word, whore, ringing in her ears. She sank onto the hay, the same hay Eli had used for a bed, and wept. 2 days later, a visitor arrived, a man in a fine buggy, pulled by 2 matching bays. He was Josiah Croft, the wealthiest cattleman in the county. He was a widower, 40 years old, with a hard face and hands that looked soft but were known for their tight grip on his assets. He did not ask for Clara. He asked for Samuel. Mary, flustered and terrified by such an important guest, showed him into the cabin. Clara, called in from the garden, stood by the door, her hands stained with dirt. Josiah Croft did not waste time. He looked at the leaking roof, the threadbare blankets, and the sick man in the chair. "Mr. Wells," Croft said, his voice booming in the small space, "your family is in a hard way. This land is unforgiving. A man needs to be strong to tame it." He glanced at Samuel's useless side, the meaning clear. "Your daughter," he continued, turning his gaze on Clara, "has made a misstep. The town is talking. Her reputation is compromised. It will be hard for her." Clara felt the heat in her cheeks. "I am a man who appreciates potential," Croft said. "She is a strong girl, a hard worker. I need a wife to run my home, and I am willing to overlook her recent association." Mary gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. This was salvation. "I will marry her," Croft declared. "I will settle your note with the bank. I will see to it you have a doctor from Santa Fe. Your family will be provided for. You will want for nothing." It was not a proposal. It was a transaction. He was buying a wife and saving a failed homestead. Samuel, his eyes watering with the effort, looked at Clara. He saw the doctor, the food, the end of the shame. He nodded, a sharp, desperate movement. "Yes," he managed. "Good." Clara stared at Josiah Croft. He was offering her a cage, a respectable cage, but a cage nonetheless. He would own her, just as he owned his cattle and his land, and he would expect her to be grateful for it. "No," Clara said. The word was quiet, but it landed like a gunshot in the cabin. "What?" Croft said, turning, surprised. "No, Mr. Croft, I thank you for your offer. It is generous, but I will not marry you." "Clara," Mary shrieked, grabbing her arm. "Clara, you do not know what you are saying. Think of your father." "I am thinking of him," Clara said, her voice gaining strength. She looked at Croft. "I will not be bought, sir, and I will not be overlooked. My family will make our own way." Croft's face darkened. He was not a man who was used to being told no, especially not by a poor settler girl with a ruined name. "You will regret this, girl," he said, his voice cold. "You have chosen. You and your family. You will have nothing. You are nothing." He turned and left, his boots heavy on the floorboards. The sound of his buggy pulling away was the sound of their last chance leaving. Samuel Wells let out a low, terrible moan and turned his face to the wall. He did not look at his daughter again. The refusal had not just damaged their fragile standing, it had destroyed it. They were now truly alone. Eli heard the news in town. He had not left the territory, only the town. He could not make himself go further. He had taken a job with a crew laying ties for a new spur of the railroad, 10 miles east. It was brutal, punishing work, lifting heavy, creosote-soaked beams from sunup to sundown. The pay was pennies. The conditions were hellish, and the other men were the kind who asked no questions and offered no company. It was exactly what he wanted. He worked until his muscles screamed, until his hands bled. He slept on the hard ground, welcoming the cold, trying to beat the memory of Clara out of his body. He heard that Josiah Croft had offered for her. He heard that she had refused him for the sake of the killer cowboy. The story was told as a joke in the saloon, that foolish girl, choosing a drifter over a cattle king. The news that she had chosen him, chosen this ruin, was a new kind of pain. He did not deserve it. He had to make her see. He had to make her hate him, for her own good. He worked harder, digging into the frozen earth, his self-loathing a bitter taste in his mouth. Clara, meanwhile, was fighting a different battle. Her father's health, fragile since the stroke, broke completely. The confrontation with Croft, and Clara's defiance, had been too much. He stopped eating. A fever set in, a rattling cough that shook his frail body. The town doctor, beholden to men like Croft, made an excuse. He was too busy. His wagon had a broken wheel. Clara knew. They had been cut off. Her father was going to die because she had said no. She sat by his bed for 2 days, forcing water between his lips, bathing his face. He was delirious, muttering about Missouri, about the crop, about shame. Thomas, terrified, whittled by the fire, making sharp sticks out of kindling. Mary prayed, her faith a dry, brittle thing. On the 3rd night, Clara knew he would not last until morning. His breathing was shallow, his skin a pale, waxy gray. He needed medicine. He needed laudanum for the pain, quinine for the fever. He needed things she could not get. She made a decision. She took the lame mule. She did not know where Eli was, only that he was working the line. She rode east, following the newly turned earth that marked the path of the coming railroad. She found the camp after midnight. It was a collection of ragged tents and a single, large fire. Men were sleeping on the ground, wrapped in filthy blankets. She saw him sitting apart from the others, staring into the flames. He looked worse than she had ever seen him. He was thinner, his face gaunt, his clothes stiff with sweat and grime. His hands, resting on his knees, were a raw, bloody mess. The skin was torn from his palms, his knuckles bruised and swollen. He heard her before he saw her. He was on his feet in an instant, a knife in his hand, his body coiled. "Eli," she whispered, stepping into the firelight. His face went through 1,000 emotions: shock, anger, fear, and a terrible aching tenderness that he tried to hide. "Clara, what are you? You cannot be here," he hissed, grabbing her arm, pulling her into the shadows. "These men, they are not good men. You have to leave, now." "My father is dying," she said, the words stark, stripped of all emotion. "He is dying tonight. I need medicine, from town, but they will not sell to me. Mr. Henderson, no one will, and I have no money." Eli stared at her. He saw the desperation, the absolute exhaustion. He saw the proud girl brought to her knees, forced to come to him, the source of her ruin, for help. "Why did you come to me?" he asked, his voice rough. "I have nothing." "You are the only one left," she whispered. That broke him. He closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping. He had tried to run, tried to punish himself, and all he had done was forge the chain tighter. "Stay here," he commanded. "Do not move. Do not let them see you." He walked back to the fire. He woke one of the men, the crew boss. "I am done. Pay me what I am owed." The boss grunted, counted out a few coins, and tossed them at him. It was not enough. It was barely enough for a bottle of whiskey, let alone medicine. Eli looked at the coins in his torn hand. He looked at Clara, a shadow hiding by the trees. He walked to where his horse was picketed. He stroked the roan's neck. Then, with a grim finality, he took the saddle from its back. It was a good saddle, old but well made, silver inlaid. It was the only valuable thing he owned in the world. It was his past, his trade, his only means of freedom. He slung it over his shoulder and walked back to the crew boss. "I'll sell you my saddle. $20. The boss whistled. "It is a good saddle." He looked at Eli, then at the shadows where Clara hid. He smiled. A slow, ugly smile. "Got yourself in trouble. Did you, Cowboy? $10. That is my price." Eli's hand twitched. He wanted to kill the man, but he saw Clara's face. 15, he growled. 12. Done. Eli threw the saddle at the man's feet. The boss counted out the silver. Eli grabbed it and went back to Clara. He did not get his horse. He put her on the mule. "I will walk you to town," he said. "I will get the medicine." They moved through the night, Eli walking beside her, his pace fast. He did not speak. He took her to the edge of town, to the back of the doctor's small house. "Stay here," he said. He went to the door and banged on it until a light appeared. Clara watched from the alley. She saw Eli talking to the doctor. She saw him press the coins into the doctor's hand. Not ask, not bargain. He was buying. And his presence, his sheer coiled force, made the doctor hurry. The doctor came back with a small box and a bottle. Eli took them and came back to her. He pressed the medicine into her hands. "Go," he said. "Hurry!" She looked at the medicine, then at him. He had no horse. He had no saddle. He had given her everything he had. "Where will you go?" she asked. "It does not matter. Go to your father." He was already turning away, a shadow fading into other shadows. Clara did not move. He was going to walk out into the prairie, with nothing. He was going to disappear. "No," she said. He stopped. She slid off the mule. She walked to him. He was standing in the dark alley, a man who had just sold his own soul to save hers. She dropped the medicine into her apron pocket and reached out. She did not touch his face. She touched his hands. She took his ruined, bloody hands in hers. He tried to pull away, as if his touch would stain her. "Clara, do not—" She held on. She brought his hands to her face, to the dim light from the doctor's window. She looked at the torn flesh, the deep bruises. "You did this," she whispered, "for us." "It is just work," he said, his voice choking. She lifted his right hand, his knuckles, to her lips, and she softly, gently, kissed the bruised, broken skin. A sound tore out of Eli's chest, a sound of such profound, unutterable pain that it staggered him. He broke. He finally, completely, broke. He sagged against the wall of the alley, pulling his hands from her grasp, his whole body shaking. "Clara," he gasped, his head bowed. "You do not know what you are asking. You do not know what I am. You cannot save me. I am what they say I am." Clara stepped closer, pinning him against the wall with her presence, her small frame shielding him from the world. She put her hands on his chest. She could feel his heart hammering like a trapped bird. "Yes, I do," she answered, her voice fierce and certain. "I know exactly what you are. You are the man who defended me. You are the man who fixed my roof. You are the man who saved me from the storm. And you are the man who just sold his freedom for my father." He looked up, his face ravaged in the darkness. He saw no judgment in her eyes, no fear. He saw only her. He saw the peace he had been running from. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her face, his rough fingers tracing the line of her jaw. It was a question. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. He leaned in, slowly, and rested his forehead against hers. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same cold air. It was not a kiss, it was more. It was a sharing of burdens, a desperate, silent promise. It was two broken souls clinging together in the dark. It was raw, and it was emotional, and it was, for that 1 second, enough. "You have to go," he whispered, his voice thick. "Your father." The word broke the spell. Clara pulled back, grabbing the medicine. "Come with me, to the barn. You have nowhere—" He wanted to say no, but he was too tired. He had nothing left to fight with. He nodded. The medicine worked. The laudanum eased Samuel's pain. The quinine broke the fever by morning. He was not better. He was not healed, but he was not dying. He slept, a deep, natural sleep. Clara went to the barn. Eli was gone. He had not taken the mule. He had just vanished. But on the floor, where he must have sat, was a small object. It was a wooden horse, charred and smooth from years of being handled. Clara picked it up. She looked at the small, burned toy. She remembered his words. A boy. We just called him Little Eli. She clutched the toy to her chest, and, for the first time, she did not cry from sorrow. She cried from a love so deep and painful it felt like a new kind of breaking. She knew, with absolute certainty, that she loved this man. She loved his scars, his ghosts, and the goodness he tried so hard to hide. Eli had not gone far. He was hiding in the creek bed, watching, waiting. He had to know if the medicine worked. When he saw Clara emerge from the cabin in the morning light, her steps lighter, he knew. He still felt unworthy. He still felt like a curse, but he could not leave, not yet. He slipped back into town, looking for scraps of work at the livery, willing to muck stalls for a place to sleep, just to be near. He was there, stacking hay, when Sheriff Brody walked in. "Eli," the sheriff said, his hand on his gun. Eli did not stop working, but his muscles tensed. "Where were you last night?" "Working the line," Eli said, his voice flat. "That is a lie. You sold your saddle to the crew boss and left before midnight." Eli turned slowly. "What do you want, Sheriff?" "Liza Jane Miller," the sheriff said. "The blacksmith's girl. She is 16. She went out to the well last night to fetch water. She never came back. Her bucket was there. And these?" The sheriff held up a set of fresh tracks, sketched on paper. They were not hoof prints. They were boot prints. "These tracks head west," the sheriff said, "out toward the wastes. You were seen moving through town, in the dark, a loner, a man with a bad past, a man known to be violent." Eli stared at him. He knew what this was. The town needed a monster, and he was it. "Where's the girl, Eli?" the sheriff demanded. "I do not know," Eli said. "I think you do. And if you do not tell me, the mob that is forming outside Henderson's store will get the answer from you themselves." The sound of the gathering was low at first, a distant hum of angry voices, but it grew fast, like a prairie fire catching dry grass. Sheriff Brody shifted on his feet, his hand still on his holstered pistol. He had not drawn it. He was a man who governed by consensus, not by force, and the consensus was turning ugly. "I am just asking you, Eli," Brody said, trying to keep his voice reasonable. "Where were you?" "I told you, I do not know the girl." Eli's voice was flat, but his body was coiled. He was standing in the middle of the livery, a pitchfork still in his hand, held loosely, but ready. The doors of the livery burst open. It was not just a few men. It was a crowd. Mr. Miller, the blacksmith, was at the front. His face was a terrible, pale mask of grief and fury. He was carrying a shotgun. Beside him stood Mr. Henderson and Mr. Shaw. "He is here, Sheriff?" Miller demanded, his voice cracking. "You got him." "Now, Amos," Brody said, holding up a hand. "We are just talking. There is no proof." "Proof?" Henderson shouted, his face red. "He is a known killer. He has been circling that settler girl like a wolf. And now Liza Jane is gone. He was seen in town last night, in the dark. What more proof do we need?" "We want to talk to him. Sheriff," Shaw said, his eyes cold and hard. He was holding a length of new rope, coiled thick in his hand. "Just an interrogation, out by the cottonwood." The word interrogation hung in the air, smelling of smoke and finality. This was a mob. Eli took a step back, his knuckles white on the pitchfork. He was not a fool. He knew what this was. He had seen it before. "I did not take the girl," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Liar!" Miller screamed, raising the shotgun. "Stop!" The voice was thin, but it cut through the noise. Clara Wells pushed her way through the men at the door. Her hair was coming loose, her face pale and streaked with dust. She had heard the shouting from the street. "Stop this!" she cried, running to stand in the space between Eli and the mob. "He did nothing." Sheriff Brody groaned. "Miss Wells, this is not your place. Go home." "He was not here," Clara insisted, her eyes wild, looking at Miller. He was with me. Last night, he was at our cabin. He was getting medicine for my father. He was with me all night." A terrible, collective silence fell over the livery. The men stared at her. Clara had just, in her desperation, confirmed their worst suspicions. She had just announced her own ruin to the entire town. "Mr." Henderson looked at her with a kind of sad, righteous disgust. "We know he was with you, child. We know you are compromised." "You do not know what you are saying, girl," Sheriff Brody said, his voice hard. He was embarrassed for her, and angry at her for complicating it. "You are a lost woman, and your word means nothing. You would lie for him. Now get out of the way." "I'm not lying. She is not worth protecting." "Sheriff," Shaw yelled, "she is as lost as he is. Get him." The mob surged. Miller raised his gun. Clara screamed. Eli moved. He was not a man to be cornered. He shoved the pitchfork into the hay, grabbed Clara, and threw her bodily behind him, toward the back stalls. "Run, Clara, run!" He did not run. He grabbed a heavy harness from the wall. The thick leather and brass buckles, a heavy, makeshift weapon. As Miller and Shaw lunged, Eli swung it. The heavy brass caught Shaw across the face, sending him reeling back with a cry. "He is armed!" someone shouted, though he was not. Brody drew his gun. "Eli, do not! Stand down!" But it was too late. Eli vaulted over the wall of a stall, kicked open the back door of the livery, and disappeared into the maze of alleys and sheds. "He is running!" Miller roared. "He is guilty! Get the horses! He is heading west!" The livery emptied as the mob, now a posse, scrambled for their mounts. Clara was left alone, shaking, in the hay-strewn aisle. Sheriff Brody, his face grim, paused at the door. "You should have stayed out of it, Miss Wells," he said. "You just made yourself an accomplice." He spat on the ground and left. Clara ran. She did not run home. She ran out the back, the way Eli had gone, cutting through the yards, her lungs burning. She did not know where he was, but she knew where he would go. He had nowhere else. She reached the homestead, her breath sobbing in her chest. The sun was setting. She ran to the barn. "Eli?" she whispered into the shadows. There was no answer. The barn was empty, smelling of hay and their lame mule. She heard the thunder of horses. The posse. They were riding hard, but they were riding past the homestead, heading west, just as Miller had yelled. They were following the boot prints the sheriff had found, the tracks that led to the wastes. Clara sank onto the milking stool, her heart a cold stone in her chest. He was gone. He had run. She stayed there as the light faded, the barn filling with a cold, purple gloom. She should go inside. She should face her mother, her father, but she could not. She had nowhere to go, either. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness in the hayloft. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Eli dropped to the barn floor, landing as silently as a cat. He had not run west. He had circled back. He had been in the loft the entire time, watching her. He was breathing hard, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. "You are a fool," he whispered, his voice a raw grate of anger and fear. "You are the biggest fool in this territory. What you said in there—" "They were going to kill you," she said, her voice shaking. "They had a rope." "And you confirmed it," he hissed. "You told them you were with me. You handed them your good name. For nothing." "It was not nothing. It was your life." "My life?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "My life is not worth your reputation. Clara, it is not worth this." He jested around the barn. "They will come here. When they do not find me out there, they will come here." He moved to the door, peering out into the dusk. "You have to go inside. You have to tell them I forced you. Tell them I came here and threatened you. Tell them you were afraid. It is the only way they will not burn this place to the ground." "No," Clara said, standing up. "I will not." "Clara, you do not understand." "I understand perfectly. Eli, you think you are the only one who is ruined. But I am ruined, too. I have been ruined since Mr. Henderson refused me flour. I was ruined when Mr. Croft tried to buy me. I am ruined, so it does not matter." She walked to the ladder. "Get in the loft. Hide. I will bring you food and water after they are asleep." He grabbed her arm. His grip was hard, desperate. "They will hurt you. They will hurt your family." She looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. "They are already hurting us. Get in the loft, please." He stared at her, his jaw working. He saw the iron in her spine. She was not the girl he had met at the mercantile. This was a woman. He let go of her arm and climbed the ladder, disappearing into the blackness above. Clara walked back to the cabin. Her mother met her at the door. Mary's face was pale, her eyes wide with a terror Clara had never seen. "They were here, Clara," Mary whispered, her voice trembling. "The sheriff, Mr. Miller, they asked if he was here." "What did you say?" Clara asked, her own voice numb. "I told them no, of course. But they did not believe me. They searched the house. They looked under Papa's bed." Mary's eyes filled with tears of humiliation. They asked about you, what he did to you." "Mama?" Mary grabbed her daughter's arms, her fingernails digging in. "Is he here? Tell me the truth. Clara, is he in the barn?" Clara met her mother's gaze. She could not lie. She just stared, her silence a confession. Mary let out a sound, a low wail. "In the barn! You have brought him here! You have hidden a murderer in our barn!" "He is not a murderer!" "It does not matter what he is," Mary cried, shaking her. "It only matters what they think he is. Clara, they will burn us. They will drive us out with nothing. This will be the end of us. Your father, your brother. You are sacrificing them. For him, he is not worth it. Clara, he is not worth your family. He is not worth your soul." "He is worth mine, Mama," Clara said, her voice dead flat. She pulled away from her mother's grasp, took the last heel of bread from the table, and filled a cup with water. "Clara, no," Mary pleaded. Clara walked out the door, leaving her mother weeping by the cold hearth. She crossed the yard, the stars a cold, distant scatter overhead. She bolted the barn door from the inside and climbed the ladder. Eli was sitting against the far wall, a shadow in the moonlight that slanted through the hay door. He looked like a man waiting for his own execution. She set the bread and water down beside him. She had a single candle stub, and she lit it, the small flame creating a tiny, fragile bubble of light in the vast darkness. She sat down, not close but not far. The barn was silent, save for the nervous stamping of the mule below. Eli did not eat. He was looking at his hands. In his lap, he was turning a small, dark object over and over. Clara recognized it. It was the charred wooden horse. "You came back for it," she whispered. He flinched, closing his hand around it. "I left it by the creek." "Why?" He looked at her, his eyes hollow in the candlelight. "I told you, I bring ruin. I left it. I thought maybe, if I left that part of me behind, the curse would stop. But it does not." He opened his hand. The horse lay on his palm. "It was my boy's, little Eli. I carved it for him." He was silent for a long time. The candle flame bent in a small draft. "I was not there," he said, his voice so low she had to lean in. "When the raid came, I was not there to protect them. I was riding with men, for money, for gold. I told Sarah, my wife. It was for us, for our future, but it was for me, for the pride, for the feeling of a gun on my hip and a fast horse." He looked at the horse, I came back, and it was all gone. Smoke and ash. I found this in the dirt. I carry it to remember. To remember that I am a man who runs. I am a man who fails the people who need him. I am not worthy of water or bread." He pushed the food away. Clara watched him, her heart aching. She saw his guilt. It was a mirror of her own. "You think you are the only one who failed someone?" she asked, her voice quiet. He looked up, confused. "You think you are the only one who feels unworthy?" She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The light flickered on her face. "We came from Missouri," she said, her voice distant, reciting a story she had never told. "The journey was hard. My husband, William, he caught a fever. He died near the Cimarron. We buried him there." Eli's eyes widened. He had not known. "He was a good man, kind, but I was already with child. His child." Clara's voice broke, but she pressed on, needing to say it, needing to match his truth with her own. It was 2 months later. We were in the Badlands, north of here. There was no food. We were eating boiled leather. I was sick. The baby came. Too soon. She stared at the candle flame, seeing a different night, a different darkness. It was a girl. I did not even have a name for her. She was so small. She did not cry. She was just cold. I held her all night, trying to warm her, but she was already gone. Tears were rolling down her face, silent, hot. We buried her by the side of the trail. I wrapped her in my only good shawl. My mother said we had to keep moving. We just left her there. I do not even know where the grave is. "I feel," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I feel like I am empty, like I failed her, like I am not a real woman. I am not worthy of love, either. Eli, I am just the one who survived when I should not have." He stared at her, his own pain forgotten, swallowed by hers. He saw her, for the first time. She was not a girl. She was a woman, forged in a grief as hot as his own. She was not a piece he had to find. She was a soldier, just like him. Slowly, his hand shaking, he reached out. He did not touch her face. He just placed his rough, torn hand over hers, where it rested on her knee. His skin was calloused, but it was warm. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand over and laced her fingers with his. He looked at their joined hands. He looked at her tear-streaked face. "You are not empty," he whispered, his voice thick. He leaned in, his gaze fixed on hers. He was not the wolf. He was the man in the alley, the man who had sold his saddle. She did not wait. She leaned into him, closing the small distance, and pressed her mouth to his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was salt and dust and desperation. It was a kiss of shared grief, of two souls who had confessed their deepest shame and found, in the other's eyes, not judgment, but recognition. He pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her loose hair. He was shaking. He was not a man taking, he was a man receiving. She clung to him, her hands moving to his chest, feeling his heart hammer against her palms. It was not lust. It was need. It was a desperate, quiet confirmation in the shadows, a pledge against the cold and the mob outside. "You are not alone. I am here." They found solace in each other in the candlelit barn, a passionate, quiet union that was not about forgetting the past, but about surviving it. They woke to the sound of shouting. It was morning. The gray light of dawn was filtering through the cracks. Eli was on his feet in an instant, pulling on his boots, his knife in his hand. "They are back," he hissed. Clara scrambled to her feet, her heart seizing. She looked down through the floorboards. Sheriff Brody was at the cabin door, pounding on it. "Mrs. Wells, it is over. We are calling it off." Clara and Eli froze. looking at each other. Clara's mother opened the door, her face white. What is it?" "We found the girl," Brody said. His voice was full of irritation, not relief. "Found her 10 miles north, in a gambler's camp. Run off with some drifter from the railroad crew. She was not taken. She went willing." He spat onto the dust. "All that riding? For a fool girl who ran off?" He turned to leave, but just then, Clara climbed down the ladder, her hair a mess, hay clinging to her dress. Brody stopped, his eyes narrowing. A moment later, Eli dropped down from the loft, landing behind her. He stood tall, his knife still in his hand, his eyes daring the sheriff to move. Brody's hand went to his gun. Then he looked at Clara, at her dress, at the hay. He looked at Eli. He understood. A slow, contemptuous smile spread across his face. "Well, look at that," Brody said. "Hiding in her barn all along. You are a lucky man. Eli, lucky she ran off and was not harmed. It saves us the trouble of a rope." He gave them one last, lingering look of disgust. "Get out of my town, both of you. I do not want to see your faces again." He turned and walked away. There was no apology. There was no justice. Just the tired contempt of a man who had been inconvenienced. But it was not over. As Brody left, Reverend Gideon arrived. He had heard the news, seen the posse returning. He walked up to the homestead, his face a thundercloud. He saw Clara, standing outside the barn, her face pale. He saw Eli standing behind her, a guardian, a shadow. Gideon saw the truth. "So," he boomed, his voice echoing in the quiet morning, "the girl is found, but the sin remains." He pointed a long, bony finger at Clara. You have brought this upon us. While the town searched, while good men rode in fear, you were here, hiding this fugitive, lying with him, committing acts of sin in defiance of God and your family." "That is enough, preacher," Eli growled, taking a step forward. "Silence," Gideon roared. "This is the source of our trouble, this sin, this decay. The Lord sent the drought, and he sent this trial to test us. And you," he spat at Clara, "you have failed. You are a blight, Clara Wells, a stain upon this community." He turned to Mary, who was standing at the cabin door, frozen in horror. "She is banned from the church. Her presence is not welcome among decent folk. And this family will answer for this." He turned and strode away, his black coat flapping like the wings of a crow. The neighbors who had gathered to watch, Mrs. Shaw, Mr. Henderson. They stared at Clara. They did not look at her with anger. They looked at her with a cold, flat finality. She was no longer one of them. They turned, one by one, and walked away. That night, a rock crashed through the cabin window. Eli, who had been sitting in the barn, heard the glass break, heard Mary scream. He ran to the cabin. Samuel was shaking, his good arm trying to shield his head. Mary was weeping, picking up the stone. Thomas was in the corner, holding his whittling knife, his knuckles white. Clara was just standing, staring at the broken glass. Eli looked at the ruin he had brought. The preacher was right. He was a blight. He was a curse. He had taken this family and broken it. He left the cabin and went back to the barn. He began gathering his things. He had nothing, just the coins in his pocket and the knife. He would walk. He would disappear. It was the only gift he could give her. She found him just before dawn, standing by the barn door, ready to slip out into the darkness. "You are leaving," she said. It was not a question. "I have to," he said, his back to her. "They will not stop, not as long as I am here. They threw a rock. Clara, tonight it is a rock. Tomorrow it is a torch." He turned to face her, his heart breaking. Maybe with me gone, they will let you be. They will forgive you." "No, they will not," she said, her voice quiet. "It does not matter. Do not go." He took a step toward her, his face a mask of agony. "Look what I did to you. Clara, look! I ruined you. Your reputation, your family, your father's home. I broke everything I touched. I told you I would." He reached out, as if to touch her face, but stopped, his hand hovering in the air between them. He let it fall. "I have to go." He turned to the door. "You did not break me." He stopped, his hand on the wooden latch. He turned back. She was standing in the shadows, but her eyes were clear. "You did not break me," she said again, her voice shaking but finding a new strength, a strength born of their night, of their shared grief. She walked toward him, closing the distance, and grabbed his arm. Her grip was fierce. "They broke me. The town broke me. The drought broke me. My father's bitterness broke me. I was broken when you found me." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the dark. "You," she whispered. "You were the one who showed me what love was." Clara's words hung in the darkness of the barn, a vow that was stronger than his refusal. "You showed me what love was." Eli stood at the door, his hand on the latch. Trapped. He had been ready to walk into the wilderness, to become a ghost again, to save her by disappearing. But her words were a rope, pulling him back from the edge. He looked at her, his face a ruin of conflict. He had no right to stay, but he found he had no strength to leave. Before he could answer, a new sound cut through the pre-dawn quiet. Not the rock, not the shouts of men, but a high, thin whistle. The wind, it had changed. It was no longer a cold breeze, but a hot, erratic breath, coming from the north. And with it, a smell. "Clara," he said, his head lifting. He didn't smell wood smoke. He smelled the world burning. He pulled the barn door open. The eastern sky, which should have been turning a pale, clear gray, was a bruised, sickly orange. A vast plume of black smoke, miles wide, was rolling toward them, obscuring the stars. Thomas ran from the cabin, pulling on his boots, his face pale with terror. "Eli! Clara! Look! The North Ridge!" It was a prairie fire. It had been burning in the high country for a day, but the wind had shifted, and now it was coming down the dry grasses of the valley, moving faster than a horse could gallop. The air was already thick, the smell of ash sharp in their throats. From the town, the church bell began to ring, not the steady call to Sunday service, but a frantic, panicked clanging, a sound of pure terror. "Mama!" Clara screamed, running to the cabin. "Get the blankets! Wet them! Put them on the roof! Thomas, fill every bucket!" Her mother came out, her hand to her mouth. "It is the end of days, the judgment." "It is a fire! Mama, move!" Clara was already working, her fear transformed into a cold, hard efficiency. Eli stood for a moment, paralyzed. Fire. It was always fire. He saw Sarah's face, the smoke, the charred wood of his own past. Then, more shouts from town. Men were running, disorganized, pointing. "There is a wagon," someone yelled. "Up on the outer ridge. They went to check the high pasture this morning." Clara froze, the bucket in her hand. "Who?" A man on horseback, riding hard from the livery, skidded to a halt. It was one of Shaw's stable hands. "It is Mr. Shaw and his boy, James. Mr. Henderson rode with them. They are trapped. The fire is coming up both sides of the gully. They are cut off." The townsfolk who had gathered in the street just stared, helpless. The outer ridge was a death trap, a finger of land with steep sides, and the fire was swallowing its base. "My God," a woman whispered. "They will be burned alive." Eli looked at the ridge, a line of orange against the black sky. He looked at the men who had held the rope, the men who had spat on Clara. He looked at Clara. She was watching him. He did not say a word. He ran to the lame mule, the only animal they had. He threw a bridle on it. "What are you doing?" Clara cried, grabbing his arm. You cannot! It is death! That animal is lame! They are trapped, he said, his voice flat. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the fire. He was not going to fail again. He was not going to be the man who was not there. Eli, no! It is Shaw! It is Henderson! They left you in the dust! Let them! He grabbed her, his hands hard on her shoulders. His eyes, in the hellish light, were clear. It does not matter who they are. Clara, get back to the cabin. Keep the roof wet. Keep your mother safe. Do not come out. He swung himself onto the mule. It was not a fast animal, but it was steady. He kicked it hard, and it bolted, limping, toward the smoke. The town watched him go. They watched the man they had condemned, the killer, the drifter, ride the lame mule straight into the wall of fire and smoke. They saw him disappear into the inferno. Clara, her heart in her throat, did as he said. She and Thomas formed a desperate line, hauling water, soaking the cabin, their small homestead a tiny, defiant island against the coming doom. The heat was a physical blow. Eli rode with his arm over his face, the smoke so thick he could not breathe. The mule was terrified, but he drove it on, his heels digging in. He knew this land. He had walked it. He knew the gullies, the game trails. He knew there was one cut, a deer path. That might still be open. He found them. They were huddled behind their overturned wagon, the horses long gone, bolted in terror. Shaw was trying to shield his son, James, who was weeping. Henderson was on his knees, praying, his face a mask of white terror. The fire was all around them, a roaring, deafening monster. "Eli!" Shaw screamed, his voice breaking. He thought he was seeing a ghost, a demon come from the flames. "On your feet!" Eli roared over the din. "We go now, or we die. The creek bed. It is the only way." "We cannot. Look!" Henderson pointed. A wall of fire, 30 feet high, blocked the path. "Not that way." Eli grabbed James, hauling the boy from his father's arms. "On the mule, now! Hold on!" He threw the boy onto the mule's back. "The rest of us, on foot! Stay close to me! Keep your heads down!" He grabbed Shaw's arm, hauling him up. "Move!" He led them, half running, half crawling, down a rocky embankment that was not yet burning. The smoke was a living thing, choking them, blinding them. Embers, large as a man's fist, rained down. Eli drove them. He was a man possessed, fueled by a decade of guilt. He put himself between them and the worst of the heat. A burning pine, its roots consumed, crashed down in front of them, blocking the path. "We are done," Henderson sobbed, falling to his knees. Eli did not pause. He shoved the mule hard, smacking its rump. "Go! Get the boy to the creek! Go!" The mule, panicked, scrambled over the rocks, disappearing into the smoke. Eli turned to the fallen tree. It was a furnace. "Through it!" "It is fire!" Shaw yelled. "It is our only way! Go!" Eli grabbed Henderson by the collar and threw him forward, into the gap between the burning branches. Henderson screamed as the heat seared him, but he made it through. Shaw followed. Eli came last. As he lunged, the main trunk shifted. A heavy burning branch struck him across the back and shoulders, driving him to the ground. His shirt, already smoldering, burst into flames. He roared, a sound of pure, animal agony. But he did not stop. He rolled, beating the flames with his bare hands, and crawled through the fire. He found them on the other side. At the edge of the creek, he shoved them into the shallow, muddy water. "Stay down!" He collapsed on the bank, his back and arms a ruin of red, blistered skin. He had inhaled the fire, and it was in his lungs. He could not breathe. He heard the fire roar as it hit the creek, steam rising in a great, angry hiss. And then, as the flames jumped the water, heading for the town, the world went black. He was brought back just as the fire swept past the edge of town. sparing the main street but taking 2 outlying barns. The men he had saved, their hair singed and their faces blackened, carried him between them. They stumbled into the street where the town had gathered and dropped Eli's unconscious body in the dirt. He was a terrible sight. His clothes were mostly burned away. His back, his arms, his hands. They were raw, bleeding, blackened. His face was covered in soot, a bloody gash on his forehead from the fall. The town was silent. They looked at Shaw and Henderson. The town leaders, saved. They looked at the boy, James, crying in his mother's arms, and they looked at the man who had saved them. There was no gratitude. There was only a profound, stunned shame. They could not reconcile it. The killer, the savior, it was too much. Reverend Gideon stepped forward, his face grim. The Lord has seen fit to spare us. He has used this vessel to do his work, and now his judgment is upon him. The doctor knelt, looked at Eli, and stood up, shaking his head. He is burned too deep. His lungs are full of ash. He will not live till morning. There is nothing I can do. He walked away. The crowd began to disperse. They left him lying in the dirt. Clara pushed through them, her face a mask of cold fury. Her own cabin was safe, the roof damp and steaming. Thomas was with her. "You are just leaving him?" she screamed at the doctor, at the preacher, at Mr. Shaw. Shaw would not meet her eyes. Henderson was already gone. "He is in God's hands. Child," Gideon said, "he is beyond our help." "He is not beyond mine," Clara spat. She looked at Thomas. "Bring the wagon, now." Together, defying the whispers, defying the preacher's hard stare, they lifted Eli's broken body onto the wagon bed. Clara ignored his wounds. She ignored the blood. She only saw the faint, shallow rise and fall of his chest. "Clara," her mother pleaded, running up. "Do not, it is not right. He is dying. Let him die in peace." "He will not die," Clara said, her voice a flat, iron promise. "And he will not die alone." She took him to the barn. It was the only place safe from the judgment in the cabin. She laid him on a bed of fresh hay, covering him with her own blanket. For 3 days, she did not leave. She tended to him. She bathed his burns with cool water, her hands gentle. She had no medicine, so she used the only thing she had, lard to cover the worst of the burns, to keep the air from them, and clean strips of her own petticoats for bandages. He was in a deep, agonizing fever. He thrashed, crying out. He cried for Sarah. He cried out, "The fire! The boy! I was not there!" Clara sat in the dark, holding his good hand, the one that was not raw. "I am here, Eli," she whispered, over and over, into the darkness. "I am here. You are not alone. You saved them." She defied everyone. Her mother brought food to the barn door but would not enter. The preacher came and stood at the entrance. "Clara Wells," he said, "you are tending to the damned. You are inviting his sin into your heart. You are forbidden. Leave him." Clara looked up from where she was spooning water between Eli's cracked, blackened lips. "Then I am damned, too," she said, and turned back to him. The preacher left, shaking his head, and she was well and truly an outcast. On the 4th day, the fever had not broken. Clara was exhausted, her hope beginning to fray. She went to the cabin to get fresh water, her body moving like a sleepwalker. Her father was awake. He had been fading ever since the night of the rock. The fire, the smoke, his own helplessness, had been the last blow. He was as pale as ash, his breath a thin, reedy whistle. Clara went to his bedside, dipping a cloth to wet his lips. His eyes opened. They were not angry, they were not full of shame. For the first time since the stroke, they were clear. "Clara," he whispered, his voice a dry leaf. "Papa?" She knelt, her heart seizing. He looked past her, toward the barn. The man, he rode into it. Yes, Papa, he is hurt, but he is alive. Samuel Wells was quiet for a long time. His good hand trembled, lifting, as if to touch her, but it fell back. I was a proud man, he rasped, his eyes filling with tears. I blamed you for my own failure. This land, it broke me. No, Papa, do not. You, he said, his breath catching. You chose the man who stayed. He took a difficult, painful breath. The one who fought, even for them, the ones who hated him. He looked at her, a profound, final understanding in his gaze. He saw her, and he saw Eli, and he saw that they were the same. That is enough, he whispered. It is enough. His eyes closed. His hand, which had been gripping the blanket, went slack. His breath sighed out and did not come back. Clara stared. The silence in the cabin was total. He was gone. The man whose judgment had been her cage, whose approval she had craved, was gone. And in his last moment, he had given it. He had given her his blessing. She wept, her head on his still chest, a long, tearing grief that was as much for his release as for her own. They buried him in the small plot behind the cabin, Mary, Thomas, and Clara, as they said their silent prayers. Eli stood in the barn doorway, supported by the frame, his body wrapped in white bandages. He was awake. The fever had broken. He watched, a silent, scarred guardian, as Clara said goodbye to her father. The town did not wait for her grief. The next day, Sheriff Brody arrived. He did not come to the cabin. He came to the barn. Clara met him at the door. "Miss Wells," he said, not unkindly, "I am sorry for your loss, but the council met this morning." "The council," she said, her voice flat. They are grateful to Mr. Eli for what he did." "Are they?" she said. It was not a question. "But his presence here, it causes disruption. The preacher, people are still afraid. They cannot forget his past. The vote was unanimous." Clara waited. "They are voting to expel him, permanently. He has done a great service, and for that, they will not hang him. They will let him leave. He has 24 hours to be outside the county line." "He cannot ride," Clara said, her voice cold. "He can barely stand. His hands—" "That is not the council's concern," Brody said, shifting. "He has 24 hours, or I am to arrest him for vagrancy, and for the assault on Mr. Shaw in the livery." He turned to go. "It is better this way, Clara, for everyone, for you. You can start over. Your father is gone. You are free." That night, Clara did not go to the barn. She washed her face. She brushed her hair. She put on her one good dress, the dark blue wool she had been married in, the one she had worn to her father's funeral. "Mama," she said to Mary, who was sitting by the cold hearth, "I am going to town." "Clara, no, it is night. You are in mourning. There is nothing left there." "Yes, there is," Clara said. She walked into the saloon. It was the first time a woman had ever crossed that threshold for anything other than cleaning. The room went dead silent. The smoke hung in the air. At the back table sat the council: Josiah Croft, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Shaw, Sheriff Brody, and Reverend Gideon. 20 other men, ranchers and shopkeepers, were at the bar. "Clara," Brody said, standing, his hand on his gun. "I told you. You told me he has 24 hours. Clara said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, and it cut through the silence. She stood alone, just inside the swinging doors, a small, dark figure in a hall of men. "This is not your place, child," Reverend Gideon said, his voice laced with pity. Go home. Grieve for your father. I am grieving, Reverend. I am grieving for a town that has lost its soul. A murmur went through the room. Josiah Croft, who had not spoken, leaned back in his chair. She is hysterical. She has lost her father, and she has been shamed by this drifter. He has a name, Clara said. His name is Eli, and he is the only man in this room who is not a coward. The room exploded. Men stood, shouting. Brody moved toward her. That is enough. Miss Wells! No, she said, her voice rising. It is not enough. You sit here in your clean shirts, and you vote to expel the man who pulled you from a fire. You, Mr. Shaw, and you, Mr. Henderson. He rode into the flames for you. He, who you tried to hang for a crime he did not commit. Shaw looked down at the table, his face burning. You talk of justice, Clara continued, her gaze sweeping the room. Where was the justice when you left him to die in the street? Where was your Christian charity? Reverend, when you forbade me to tend to him? He fixed my family's barn for nothing. He sold his saddle, his only possession, to buy medicine for my father. When your doctor refused us, he saved me from the duster. When you all hid in your homes. She pointed a finger at the council. You brought a rope. You were a mob. He was the innocent man. And when the fire came, he was the only hero. You are afraid of him. You are afraid of him because he shows you what you are. You are weak. You are cruel. And you are cowards. The silence that followed was terrifying. Reverend Gideon stood, his face white with rage. This is blasphemy. She is lost. Josiah Croft stood. The vote is final. The man leaves. Men began to get up. They would not look at her. They were ashamed, and they hated her for making them feel it. They walked out, pushing past her, refusing to meet her eyes. Mr. Shaw, Mr. Henderson. They left. Soon, the room was half empty. Only the council and a few men at the bar remained. Then, a man at a back table, a quiet wheat farmer named Silas, stood up. He looked at Clara, his eyes full of a strange respect. He took his rough hands and he clapped, just once, a single, sharp sound that cracked the heavy silence. Clara held her head high. She had not won, but she had spoken the truth. She turned, her back straight, and walked out of the saloon, leaving the remaining men in their own shame. She returned to the barn. Eli was standing by the door. He was dressed. He had his few things in a roll. He was pale, and his hands were wrapped in white bandages. But he was standing. I heard, he said, his voice rough. They are right to be shouting. They are cowards, she said. He looked at her, his face a map of pain. Clara, you just buried your father, your mother, your brother. This is your home. You cannot sacrifice all this. This was it, his final attempt to save her from himself. You cannot let me destroy you. I will go. They will forget. You can build a life here. She stepped close to him, so close she could feel the heat still radiating from his skin. She looked at the bandages on his hands, the hands that had saved her, the hands that had sold his saddle, the hands that had held her in the barn. My home? She said, her voice soft. This is not my home. It is a plot of land where my father died of a broken heart and a town tried to hang an innocent man. It is just a place. She looked up, meeting his eyes. I already gave it all away. Eli, I gave it away when I stood up for you in the livery. I gave it away when I stood in that saloon tonight. It is already gone. She smiled, a small, sad smile. I am not taking it back. He stared at her, the last of his resistance crumbling. She was not a sacrifice. She was his partner. She was his. They will not let us stay, he whispered. I do not want to stay, she answered. She looked out the barn door, not at the town, but past it, to the west, where the mountains were a dark promise against the stars. "We will leave together. Further west," he said, the words a promise, "beyond their reach. Somewhere new. Somewhere we can build," she finished. He nodded, a slow, final movement. He reached out. His bandaged hand, raw and scarred, gently touched her face. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. It was settled. They left at dawn. Clara's mother, Mary, stood at the cabin door, her face a crumpled, tear-stained map of grief. She had packed a small sack of food for them, cornbread, dried apples, and the last of their salt. Thomas, his eyes red, stood beside her, his hand gripping his mother's. He was the man of the house now. Clara embraced her mother, a long, tight, desperate hug. "Mama, you will be all right. The town, they will not harm you now. With Papa gone, and us, they will have their peace." "There is no peace here, Clara," Mary whispered, clutching her. "Only dust. Go find your own." Clara hugged Thomas, her heart aching. "You are strong, Thomas, stronger than Papa ever knew. Take care of her." He nodded, unable to speak, and pressed something into her hand. It was a small, beautifully carved wooden bird, a whittling he had made during the long, dark nights. Clara closed her hand around it, a piece of her brother, her old life, to take into the new. Eli was waiting. He had their few possessions, 2 bedrolls, the sack of food, a water skin, and his knife, lashed to the back of the lame mule. He was pale, his body still a geography of pain from the fire. His hands were wrapped in clean, white bandages, a stark contrast to his trail-worn clothes. Clara looked back at the small, sagging cabin one last time. She looked at the fresh grave on the hillside. Then she turned her back on it all. Eli helped her onto the mule, his bandaged hands clumsy but gentle. He would walk. "Eli," she said, her voice quiet. He looked up at her, his gray eyes clear in the morning light. "Which way?" He did not look back. He looked west, toward the rugged line of mountains that scraped the sky, a barrier of granite and shadow. "That way," he said, "over the mountains, where the maps run out." He took the mule's lead rope, and together they walked away from the town, away from the valley of their sorrow. The journey was a trial by stone. The high trails were not paths. They were suggestions, game trails that wound through sharp rock and thorny scrub. Eli, still weak, pushed himself with a grim, silent endurance. His lungs burned in the thin air, and Clara knew his back and arms were in constant agony, but he never spoke of it. Clara walked as often as she rode, sparing the mule. At night, she would unwrap his bandages by the small, smokeless fire. The burns were healing, but they were a terrible, puckered red, a permanent reminder of the fire. She would clean them, her touch soft, and rewrap them. He would sit, rigid as stone, his jaw tight, enduring her care as he endured the pain. "You should not have to do this," he rasped one night, the firelight catching the new scars on his face. "We are a pair. Eli," she said, tying off the bandage. "You and I will hold the bandages. You will hold the knife. That is how we will survive." They moved slowly, their progress measured in aching miles. The air grew colder. Autumn was dying, and winter was waiting for them in the high passes. The wind turned from a whisper to a howl, carrying the first stinging needles of snow. Within a week, they were trapped. An early blizzard descended, a world of swirling, suffocating white. They found meager shelter in a cleft of rock, huddling together with the mule for warmth. The snow fell for 2 days, burying the trail, burying the world. Their food ran out. The cornbread, then the apples. Soon, there was nothing. Hunger became a cold, constant ache in their bellies. The mule, starving, gnawed at the bark of a frozen pine. Eli, his face gaunt, his wounds still raw beneath his shirt, would leave the shelter. He was too weak to hunt, and his hands were still too damaged to properly hold a rock, let alone a snare. But he would go, disappearing into the white, and come back hours later, his face grim, with a handful of frozen, bitter berries, or a strip of edible bark he had cut with his knife. They grew weak. The cold was a living thing, a predator that stalked them, seeping into their bones. On the fourth night without food, Clara woke from a fitful doze. She was shivering, so cold she could not feel her feet. Eli was sitting up, watching her. He had not slept. "I am so cold, Eli," she whispered, her teeth chattering. He did not speak. He unlaced his bedroll and moved, his body aching with protest, and wrapped himself around her. He pulled her tight against his chest, his arms encasing her, his own bedroll covering them both. He tucked her head under his chin. His body was thin, scarred, but it was warm. He was a furnace of sheer, stubborn life. "I told you," she murmured, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I told you I would be your peace." He held her tighter, his bandaged hands gripping her shoulders. "You are more than that, Clara," he whispered into her hair. "You are my grit. You are my spine." They lay like that, two survivors against the white, sharing the last of their warmth. The hunger was a distant, dull roar. All that mattered was the steady, slow beat of his heart against her ear. They didn't survive because of strength. They survived because neither was willing to let the other die. The storm broke. The sun came out, sharp and blinding on the new snow. They were skeletal, weak, but alive. Eli, his eyes burning with a desperate resolve, managed to snare a rabbit. They cooked it, the smell of the meat an agonizing, beautiful thing. It was just enough to give them the strength to move on, to begin the long, slow descent from the mountains. They came out of the snows and into a brown, cold valley, following a creek that promised a way down. They had been walking for nearly a day when Eli stopped, holding up a hand. He had seen it first, a broken wagon, tipped on its side, one wheel splintered. There was no smoke, no horses, only silence. Eli drew his knife. He motioned for Clara to stay with the mule. He moved forward, his steps as silent as the snow they had left. He peered around the wagon. A woman was sitting on the ground, leaning against the wreck. Her dress was torn, her hair a wild, matted tangle. Her arm was wrapped in a bloody, crude bandage, and her face was blank, her eyes staring at nothing. Two children, a boy of about 4 and a girl a little older, were huddled under a quilt beside her. They were thin, their faces dirty, their eyes huge and terrified. When the woman saw Eli, she did not scream. She just flinched, pulling the quilt tighter around the children. "Ma'am," Eli said, his voice low, trying not to spook her. He sheathed his knife, holding his bandaged hands up. "We mean you no harm." Clara, hearing his voice, came forward, leading the mule. The woman saw Clara, and her face crumpled. "He is gone," she whispered, her voice a dry croak. "Andrew, he went for water. They took the horses. They took everything. He tried to stop them." She gestured vaguely to the rocks, where a dark stain marked the ground. "He is gone. They shot him." Clara's heart stopped. She looked at the woman, at the children, at the hopeless ruin. She saw herself 2 years ago, burying her own child on the trail. "How long?" Clara asked, kneeling beside the woman. 2 days. I cannot walk. My arm, it is broken." She looked at her children. "There is no food. There is no water. We are just waiting." Eli looked at their supplies. They had the last of the rabbit and maybe a day's worth of water. They were starving themselves. He looked at Clara, his face grim. This was a death sentence. To stop was to die with them. Clara met his gaze. He saw the fire in her eyes. the same fire that had faced down the saloon. "We are not leaving them, Eli," she said. It was not a request. He had known she would say it, and he had known in that same instant that he would not argue. He was no longer the man who ran. He nodded. A single, sharp movement. "Get the water. Clean her arm. I will make a shelter." Clara took the water skin, her hands steady, and began to tend to the woman, whose name was Abigail. Eli went to work. His hands were raw, the new skin beneath the bandages tearing open, but he ignored the pain. He salvaged planks from the broken wagon, cut pine boughs, and using the mule, dragged rocks. He built a lean-to against the side of a cliff, a small, tight shelter that would hold their collective warmth against the wind. It was hard, brutal work, and it took what was left of his strength, but he did not stop until it was done. The children watched him. The little boy, his eyes wide and silent, never looked away. He watched this scarred, silent man build a home from wreckage. That night, they huddled in the shelter. Eli had built a small fire. He had taken his knife and walked into the dusk. He came back with nothing, his face set, but later. Clara saw him checking a line of snares he had set by the creek. He sat apart, staring into the fire, his hands bleeding through the white linen. The little boy, his name was Samuel, crawled from under the quilt. He walked, unsteadily, over to Eli. Eli tensed. Not used to children, not since. The boy said nothing. He just held out a small, smooth piece of wood he had been holding. He offered it to Eli. Eli looked at the boy. At the offering, he saw, for a fleeting, agonizing second, little Eli's face. He took the wood. His hand was shaking. He pulled his knife, and with slow, careful strokes, his bandaged fingers clumsy, he began to carve. He did not make a horse. He carved a small, simple bird, just like the one Thomas had given Clara. He handed it back to the boy. The boy looked at it, his fingers tracing the shape. And then, for the first time in days, he smiled. He did not go back to his mother. He sat down by Eli's leg and, eventually, his head drooped, and he fell asleep, his hand resting on Eli's boot. Clara watched, her heart so full it ached. Eli did not move. He sat as still as the mountain, a guardian for a child that was not his, the firelight catching the glint of tears in his eyes. Spring found them in a new valley. They had brought Abigail and her children, half carrying them, to a small, burgeoning settlement. It was not a town. It was just a collection of cabins in a fertile, green bowl, cupped by mountains, safe from the winds. The people who met them were not like the people of the old town. They were German immigrants, quiet farmers, a few ex-miners. They were hard, and they were busy, but they were not cruel. They saw a group that had come through fire and snow. They saw Clara's strength, Eli's scarred hands, and the way the children clung to him. A farmer named Mr. Schmidt offered them his barn to stay in. Is work, much work. You eat. They worked. As Abigail healed, she found work cooking for the small community. Clara, seeing the children running wild, felt the old, familiar ache. She remembered her loss. She took the children, her own, Abigail's, and the handful of others in the valley, and she started a school. She held it in the shade of a large oak tree, teaching them their letters with a charred stick and a piece of slate. Eli's strength returned, and his reputation was not one of a killer. It was of a builder. The fire had taken the raw, restless energy from him and replaced it with a deep, steady power. He helped Mr. Schmidt build a new, larger barn. He helped the German baker build a stone oven. His hands, no longer bandaged, were a mass of silvery scars, but they were strong. He was the man who could set a foundation true. He was the man who could lift the ridgepole. Their love was not a thing of passion and desperation anymore. It was a thing of quiet habit. It was the way he brought her a cup of water at the end of the day. It was the way she would set aside the best piece of bread for him. It was the way they would sit on a log in the evenings, not needing to speak, just watching the valley turn purple in the twilight. One night, after a long day of raising the walls of a new cabin, they walked to the riverbank. The air was warm, smelling of pine and damp earth. Clara sat on a smooth stone, and Eli sat beside her. He was washing his hands in the cold, clear water, the grit of the day clouding around his fingers. She watched him. She reached out and took his wet hands, holding them in her own. The skin was rough, calloused from the new work, but the fire scars were still there, pale and strange in the moonlight. They were still his hands, the hands that had defended her, that had touched her in the alley, that had held her in the snow. "They are less rough," she whispered, tracing a scar. "This land is softer," he said. They were quiet for a moment. She looked around at the peaceful valley, at the small, safe lights of the cabins. She looked at the man beside her. "You gave me a life," she whispered. She meant this peace, this safety, this feeling of being home. Eli looked at her. His gray eyes, which had been so full of ghosts, were clear. He saw the woman who had faced down a mob for him, who had trusted him, who had followed him into the unknown. "Clara," he said, his voice thick, "you were the first one to see me." She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder, his scarred, strong, builder's shoulder. The years were hard, but they were good. Word reached them. Years later, from a traveler heading west, the old town, the one that had cast them out, was dying. The railroad had passed it by, choosing a different route. The drought had returned, settling in for good. The righteous anger had soured, and the people had turned on each other before drifting away. Henderson's store was boarded up. The church was empty. It was a ghost town. Clara and Eli felt no victory. They felt only a quiet, sad pity for a place that had chosen judgment over kindness, and had withered for it. Their own valley thrived. They had a child, a daughter, with Clara's dark hair and Eli's quiet, steady gray eyes. They named her Grace. One afternoon, when Grace was 5, Eli took her to the small paddock by their new cabin. It was a home he had built with his own hands, small but sturdy, with a porch that faced the mountains. He was teaching her to ride a small, shaggy pony. "Hold the reins, Grace," he said. His voice, once a low gravel, now softened with patience. "Not too tight. Let her feel you. You do not command her. You ask her." His scarred hands rested over hers, showing her the way. Clara watched from the porch, her apron dusted with flour. She was baking bread, a double batch, for a new family of settlers that had just arrived, exhausted and hopeful, in the valley. Their life was not easy. It was real. It was filled with the ache of planting and the joy of harvest, the fear of winter and the relief of the thaw. It was a life earned. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the last of the light bleed from the sky. Grace was asleep inside. The valley was quiet. Eli sat in a chair he had made, his hands resting on his knees. He was older now, his hair gray at the temples, but he was solid. He was rooted. Clara sat beside him, in her own chair. She reached out, her hand now weathered and calloused itself, and laid it on top of his. A lifetime of conversation passed in that simple touch. She felt the scars, the calluses, the warmth. She remembered the man in the livery, the man in the storm, the man in the fire. She leaned in, her voice a soft murmur in the dusk. "Let me serve you still," she whispered. Eli turned his hand over, his strong, scarred fingers lacing with hers. He did not speak. He just held her hand, holding it tight, holding it close. "Thank you for listening to this story. We would love for you to comment where you are listening from to connect with others. subscribe to the From Wild West channel, and share your thoughts with us in English.